I always have a good idea who's going to be in, but you just never know. All right,
Mm.
so we are live. So come on in, everyone. Come, children, come to the light. All right, let me go to. Let me grab YouTube first. Yeah, so Rob, it's been a while since you've been on. It was wrote it down, 2018, episode
Hmm.
125, titled "Our Strange Skies," aptly
Yeah.
named.
Hmm. I was just a real youngin' back then. Like things have changed.
You're like, oh, we have things to talk about now, even
Oh yeah.
extra.
Oh yeah. I know a lot more now.
Well, yeah, but you did share a lot of really cool stuff on that show, I have to say. I
Hmm.
mean, that was not like a bummer, boring show. That was an incredible
No.
episode. So,
Yeah.
all right, everybody, link is going up on Patreon first. Okay, that is up. Let me grab the invite link. That is in comments. It's already up on Facebook. Every time I check, it's there. So I'm just not gonna check this time. Of course, that'll be the one time is not. That's okay. I
It
just fixed it.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Trust
yeah,
me.
no, now you got to do it. Now you got to make sure. Uh
Yeah. I'm like, it's fine. They're fine. They're like, still the link. But it's in Discord to watch. And now let me click the join. When you guys do your lives, what do you use Zoom or do you use StreamYard like we're doing or?
I used StreamYard for quite a while. I haven't done a live in probably about a year. But yeah, I was using StreamYard when I was doing it.
Yeah. It's the most reliable one. I've tried
Hmm.
what's the other Riverside.fm?
Yep.
Not a fan. Not a fan. They need some upgrades.
Yep. They're relatively new, so like
Yeah.
I think the initial rollout was it's a little different, but yeah, they definitely need some upgrades. Like it just seems like a lot of services are in that like Zencaster was very it was bad for a long time. It's finally gotten to a
Yeah.
decent place, but sometimes you just lose audio. And I had the Kryptonaut guys on for an episode that was almost 3 hours long, and we lost one person's audio. Had to scrap the entire thing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and you don't
Yeah.
know until the end, right? And which
No.
is lovely. So you're
Yep.
like, "Oh, that was an epic conversation that no one can ever hear. Awesome."
Yep.
Yeah, that's not good.
No. Never
That's why
is.
I'll usually do the backups. I don't even call phones anymore for main ITF. I just I use StreamYard, but just do I just won't use the video to save as much bandwidth as possible. I don't even know if that helps. I think it does. But and then just
Hmm.
have that as a backup audio and then still run from the road with my micro SD. So
Yep.
backups are good.
They are good.
But I have had the occasion where there are some hiccups for main that I did not hear live until you go to edit and you're like, oh gosh, I did not even
Yep.
pick up on that while we were talking, but that is okay. Well, yeah, let me do a proper intro here for you. So, on this edition of Patreon Live, we have Strange as Fake UFO Cases with Rob Kristoffersen. And I kind of mentioned in the very beginning when we went live, but I want to make this an official announcement. He has been on before. It's episode 125 titled Our Strange Guys from 2018. And I mean, you covered all kinds of stuff on that episode, including a super strange and wonderful because it's just such a great one off for some of my favorites. This strange creature, insecty thing on a walk
Hmm.
home. So I encourage everybody to go check that out. But speaking of our strange skies, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, was this subtitle always on your podcast? The subtitle of UFOs throughout history, or has that been added?
That was a suggestion from my producer, and it's helped a little bit, draw people to the podcast.
Yeah.
Doing things a little smarter these days, I
You
guess.
know what's funny though, Rob, about that? Because I was like, "Oh gosh, did I miss that before?" And I didn't, like, because I like to say, if you're saying a book, you should say the
Mm,
entire title. Same thing with the podcast. I did the same thing for Into the Fray after I don't even know when I did this, but I added on that hate it, but his is an abyss that is, a journey into the whatever the hell it says, a journey into the abyss that is the paranormal. Because I wanted it,
Yeah.
like yours says UFOs. After ours, you got to have that UFO thing in there. I wanted the paranormal word in there, so it helps to what it
Hmm.
aggregate for the masses
Yeah.
on Apple Podcasts and all of that. So
Yeah.
as much as I hate having to do that, that is the world that we live in, right? So
Yeah, you gotta get attention to you gotta get attention to the product, and you gotta do
yeah,
what you gotta do to do that, and, unfortunately, sometimes you gotta tack on taglines that you don't necessarily want, but the cool thing is, like, you can just call it OSS, that's fine. Our Strange Skies, it's good, it's good, we don't need to go beyond that.
it's the hashtag OSS that we want to go viral.
Mhm. Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I keep threatening to use my TikTok account. I still haven't pulled the trigger. I just threatened last week. Well, not threatened, but just made fun of myself for even thinking that I should use my account, and,
Mhm.
I still haven't I'm still a chicken about it, so, yeah.
I've
Because someone was like, "You
dabbled.
gotta get on TikTok." Oh, have you?
Yeah, I have dabbled a little bit, and like it can be tough to get out there. But Ryan Sprague is he's totally hitting that. He's been pretty good with TikTok,
Yeah,
I think, and he's perfect for it. But me, I'm just I think I'm a little too weird for TikTok. I don't think TikTok can handle my weirdness. Like, there's a certain sect of weirdness that's okay on there, but not mine. Mine is not acceptable, I think, to most people, because most of the time what you'll get is like people in the comments pushing like the most radical theories, like, and they're always like the UFOs are demons. It's like, no, no, stop.
yeah, I mean, maybe see, but you might be wrong in some way, shape, or form about that, and I still
Hmm.
don't know what she means by this, but my I talked to my daughter about TikTok because she'll send me, like, just hilarious TikTok videos. I mean, that's what it's for,
Hmm.
right? It's laughing your ass off
Yeah.
most of the time, and, I was showing her my feed, and she goes, "Oh, you're on the" what did she call it? Shit, now I forget. Okay, well, I don't know what she called my feed, but she goes, "Yeah, my feed is more like the." She didn't call it the dark side of TikTok, but or maybe she called it the deep side or whatever the word was.
Yeah.
I can't remember it now. Cool story, Shannon. But she's like, "Oh, how cute, mom!" Like patting my head, like, "Oh, you're on the light side of TikTok." I'm like, "Well, I don't know how to find the other side stuff."
Yeah, it's like, the thing is like, regardless of whatever kind of social media you're using, it takes time to actually like develop a timeline, or make that algorithm work for you to the point where you actually enjoy most of your feed, because half of it is just like crap that you couldn't care about. And uh even now, like, I get stuff that I don't want, and I don't know how to fully cultivate that feed. So it's tough. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter what kind of social media it is, but eventually, like, I think Twitter and Instagram are easier to get on there, because you can make it work for you a lot easier than anything else, because you can follow certain like hashtags and stuff like that. But
yeah.
when it comes to Twitter or TikTok, it is a device unto its own. It's hard to master. It really is.
I think the first 2 hashtags that I should use, and at least I mean, if I ever get on there and not be a chicken, but should be "into the fray" and then hashtag "no clue what I'm doing." That'll be my
Yeah,
first 2 tags for a while,
exactly. That's
There you
perfect.
go.
That's perfect.
That'll work. Alright, well, but Rob, before we get into the cases that you chose, can you talk a little bit about your podcast, Our Strange
Mhm.
Skies: UFOs Throughout History? Because it's not just UFOs. I mean, even just recently, you had Mothboy Matt on, and he's talking about elves, and you cover humanoids and even cryptids, Bigfoot, and stuff like that. So just talk a little bit about your pod.
Yeah, so Our Strange Skies, we've been doing this since late 2017, and it's gone through a lot of changes, but primarily most of the time we're covering UFOs, humanoids, and stuff like that. We've veered into like anomalous Bigfoot territory. We did an episode about humanoid sightings that felt like ghost encounters. We did an episode about aliens with we called them the Balians, the big ass eared aliens. But yeah, we cover a diverse array of topics within the UFO topic itself, and For me, I tend to focus on humanoid encounters. It's kind of my wheelhouse when it comes to this stuff. And that's not to say that UFOs themselves are boring, but when you have a podcast and you want to make it entertaining, and the UFOs are kind of doing the same things over and over again, you kind of need to spice it up with a humanoid here and there. So you always look for the kind of UFO sightings that do come with aliens and humanoids, some abductions and stuff like that. So yeah, we generally focus solely on the UFO side of things. We dip our toes here and there. We had Stan Gordon on, and Stan got into some really weird stuff with Bigfoot and other things. And but yeah, we just whatever really kind of grabs my interest at the time, I'll cover it on the podcast. And I have a kind of a series called The Swerve, and then we've done 2 episodes of it. Where one of them was a straight up poltergeist case, and the other one was Jeff the Talking Mongoose. But yeah, we, just covering as many UFO topics, trying to make them interesting, and just dipping our toes where we can, every now and then.
Yeah, I'm definitely in that same boat. I'm kinda like, if I hear one more light in the sky story, there better
Hmm.
be floating through walls and sore buttholes or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's got to be something else in there, because just in my mind, most of the lights in the sky and hey, even some of these crafts, which craft stories are a little cooler, but, most of it's ours, man. Like, I'm like, I need some weird stuff to make me think maybe this is something else, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I am definitely with you there.
Yeah,
And I
for
see
sure.
all the bodies here watching. Hello, Jake, David, and Crowley. Right. All right, Rob. Well, yeah, let's dive in here. Let us start here then with, oh, by the way, have you blown up that hashtag Balians yet? Because I really like that.
I've tried, and you could get so far with it, but I try to bring it up every now and then. It's like, oh, have you heard of the
Bullshit.
Balians? Yeah.
Bullshit. It can become like wolf for end of the fray, because I
Yep.
can't say the
Yep.
L properly. So it's one of those things. So people will throw that in there. It's become one of those exclusive ITF things. So Balian should be yours for sure.
It should. It
Yes,
really
sir.
should.
All right. So first we are going to California, and we're going to talk about Happy Camp.
Happy Camp is this is a really interesting, terrifying series of events that took place in the 1970s, the mid 1970s. And Happy Camp, it's in Northern California. It's if you go on Wikipedia, it says it's a census designated place. It's really small. I think there's like 900 people that live there. It's primarily known for mining and stuff like that, but it's also only about a couple of hours away from Mount Shasta. And while I was doing research for this case, there's a great quote from one newspaper in the 1970s. Uh, this is by an article by a woman named Emily Frank, and she referred to Mount Shasta as the quote glistening superstar of all mountains. Its alpine ridges seem to join the very rim of heaven. I mean, if you could talk up a mountain, that's how you do it right there.
Wow.
She just totally
Kudos.
talked up Mount Shasta. It's just absolutely wonderful. And it kind of makes me want to go there. But the um the incidents at Happy Camp California are kind of reminiscent of the movie The Fourth Kind in a way. Not in the sense that aliens are like breaking people's necks per se, but that idea that alien abductions can kind of be contagious once you start looking into it, it kind of takes an interest in you. So the events all begin on October 25th, 1975. Two young guys, Steve Harris, who's 19, and Stan Gayer, who was 25, they're hanging out in this area called the Saddle. And They work nearby, and they notice this kind of like large red star in the sky, and it's kind of just like hovering over to the northwest. And then they look in the opposite corner and they can see another red light moving in the opposite direction. And it wasn't long before they noticed kind of one very close to the ground, maybe a few hundred feet away from them. Um, it, so they decide to go down this mountain that they're on and investigate it. They got a Ford Bronco. They pile into it, and they drive down to where they see this object, and they search the area with flashlights, and they discovered a pile of what they thought was either mica or vermiculite, just a pile sitting there totally out of place. Is about a foot in diameter, 4 to 5 inches high, and they're presuming that it was left by this UFO. So, and they knew this area well because this is an area where they hunted many times before, and they worked nearby, so they're very familiar with the area. And the next night, they decide to return to the area with a mill worker buddy of theirs named Carl Jackson. And they bring a metal detector to the site, and they find three shallow imprints in a triangular shape, about 20 feet apart. And each imprint measures about 18 inches by 24 inches. It's about an inch deep. So every time this metal detector goes over these marks, it goes off, which is strange because you got aliens, UFOs depositing metal for some reason. And even stranger, during their impromptu investigation, they all heard this strange high pitched sound. Never heard it before. And uh, Jackson grabs his 30 caliber rifle. He's resting on the hood of the Ford Bronco, and this loud screeching sound comes over this embankment and comes towards them. And from about 40 to 50 feet away, they hear this electronic noise. They describe it as microphone feedback. And all of a sudden, they see two bright, glowing eyes. They take their spotlight, they aim it over there, and the only thing that they can see is the eyes. There's no figure that they can see attached to these eyes, and these eyes pretty big. They're like 2.5 inches. They're 8 inches apart, so whatever it is pretty big. And they stood roughly 5 feet above the ground. So this is a direct quote. It was as if whatever was there was blocking out or absorbing the powerful light in some manner as to render it invisible except for the eyes. Trees and brush in the background were brightly illuminated around and above the entity, but nothing directly behind it showed up. So we've got kind of a predator situation happening here. And anyway, these guys, they start to get freaked out, so they decide to run for their truck that they came in. Keys in the ignition, foot on the gas. Their car will not move until it just finally, shoves forward, bolts forward. They end up in a ditch briefly, but they get themselves out. They end up damaging their universal joint in the back, and they eventually race into town. So they tell a friend of theirs, a woman named Helen White, and she's an old woman. She's an older lady, and she insists on bringing her out there. So everybody piles back into the vehicle along with Helen. There's another guy named Rick Poole, and the five of them go out there. They've got their flashlights, they got their gun, and they start making a bunch of noise trying to draw in whatever it is. Not a good idea. So immediately they hear this loud sound, and the direct quote is, "It sounds like wow, 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 wow." So they hear the sound, they turn in the direction of where it's coming from, and they observe three forms from 30 to 35 feet away. They're 5 feet high, vaguely in the form of a human, but they're dark, they're non-reflective. There's kind of a glow around the outline of them. This time you see the figures, but there's no eyes visible. And these figures were kind of like moving in a perimeter around them, just like trying to like keep them boxed into where they were. And despite they have these flashlights and everything, they're not getting a better view of them when they shine their flashlights on them. So whatever these figures are, they can somehow camouflage themselves, but they have a slight glow to them. And Helen had a camera, but she was just like in stun awe. She didn't want to pick it up. She didn't want to aim it or anything like that. And then all of a sudden she says, she asks one of the guys, I think it was Steve, Do you feel weight on you? I feel like something is choking me." And then they all start to feel this choking sensation. And Steve later remarked that it felt as if his clothes were actually getting heavy and it was difficult to breathe, as if the oxygen was just kind of being sucked out of the air. Um, he assumed that it was kind of a mass hallucination later, but like even still, like that's freaky. It's very freaky. So these figures, they just kind of keep their distance, 30 to 35 feet away. They see that he still has that gun, and after 3 to 4 minutes, they pile back in their vehicle and they get the hell out of there. They descend down the mountain, and there's a glowing orange red object that lifts up, follows them for a little bit, and then it just takes off into the night sky. So this case kind of starts to get a little attention in the local press, and there's skeptics saying that there was a survey crew shining lights on this mountain, but it doesn't explain everything. And not only that, like, these objects were, you know, in the sky pretty high, and like it didn't make sense. Like, if you're surveying, why do you have your lights in the sky? That makes no sense. But um there are rumors that start to circulate in town that there was a UFO that had crashed on one woman's property, but could, uh, you know, uh, nobody could actually like validate the sighting, or the incident. It's just one of those things somebody reported. But MUFON enters the picture, and in particular, a guy named Paul Cerny, who was, I think he was California's director state director for like the northern section of California, and he was a pretty intelligent guy. He like very serious individual, an engineer by trade. He had a lot of credibility, and he comes and he investigates this case. And one of the first things that they do is they gather up this sample of whatever had left this pile of stuff following their first sighting. And they have a guy, a physicist named Richard Haynes, who was also a member of MUFON and a UFO investigator by his own trade. He tests the material, turns out to be vermiculite. Nobody knows how it got out there because it's apparently not natural to just find it out in the wild like that. So Paul Cerny and another guy named Tom Gates, they start investigating the case, and they go up to the mountain on February 7th, 1976. They're up there with Helen, and they got radios. They kind of split up a little bit. They're trying to, you know, experience what they experience, and they're up there for about 4 hours, and they decide to call it quits. So they start heading down the mountain. They stop briefly at a turnaround, and just like hang out for a few minutes. And what they see is like an orange glow coming from behind these mountains, and they see slowly this like large rectangle of orange light kind of lift up, go back down, lift up, go back down. Like the way there's a sketch of this, and the way that it's drawn, it kind of looks like a big movie screen coming up over the mountain and then going back down in many ways. So they see this, um and they eventually go back the next day to try and get measurements of how big they thought this thing was, and it turned out to be is about 35 to 45 feet in diameter. So, um, the story, though, when you find the original articles that Paul Cerny wrote for this, he promised us a part 3 and a part 4, and he never delivered on it. However, I was just, like, using anything that I could find to find more information about this because he alluded to abduction cases happening in the wake of these incidents. In particular to Helen White. Like, the moment she got interested in this, case, she started experiencing, abductions, and I managed to find an article through the UFO News Clipping Service. A reporter named Hazel Davis went to the 1979 MUFON Symposium, which was held in Burlingame, California that year. And Helen was interviewed for a TV program for VL TV called Real People, and it featured 3 women who claimed to have been abducted by aliens. And I'm going to quote the article here because it actually goes into a little bit of detail about all of the abductions. She had multiple abductions following these incidents. Quote, Helen's segment of the interview concerned portions of her account of being abducted along with 2 men from Happy Camp, Stan Gayer and Steve Harris, who had a trap line on Cade Mountain, which is the specific mountain that they were um, having all these experiences. They also used to go to a clearing there away from the populated area to shoot their guns. This particular time of her abduction, the three of them were carried into the spaceship by a strange ray of light. This was in November of 1976 and occurred on Cade Mountain in the area of the former town dump site. The strange ship landed with 2 beings emerging. A number of other residents of the town were also present and experienced a feeling of choking, but the others left before the 3 were abducted. Everything lit up, and one of the locked doors of the car opened, and they were unable to remember anything until waking up in the ship in the sky. The beings spoke English, so they were able to converse freely with them. They assured them that they would not hurt them. And as she said on the television show, when we again were back on Earth, we did not know what had happened. We next remembered being back in the car and driving along and singing, There is Power in the Blood, an old religious song. The television show closed with some lighthearted remarks, leaving the rest to the imagination of the audience. Helen reports another abduction about 1 year ago in about the same area, this time cutting wood with her young grandson, Randy. The ship and beings sat down near them, and they knocked Randy out with some weird device. Helen thought they had killed him. She began crying, and the being kept telling her he would be okay and not to be afraid. They took them into the craft, examined her, and later ordered her to put her clothes on, and then she and Randy were allowed to return to Earth with some personal advice for her well being. And okay, I just gotta say, every time aliens offer personal advice, I get upset. Like, look at what you're putting me through. You're gonna offer me personal advice? I think the shoe's on the other foot, pal, because I'm about to offer you some advice. Maybe we could go through this with a little more diplomatic solution in mind rather than just, nabbing my butt off the street and just doing this, without my free will intact. But the article goes on, just as recent as September of this year, while cutting wood in the Mill Creek area, she again had another encounter with the UFO people. She had cut up a whole log and had started splitting the wood when she was tapped on the shoulder by an unknown being. She yelled, "Oh no, not again," and threw her chainsaw and axes in the pickup and roared down the mountain, scared to death. When she got home, she found black and blue marks all over her arms and shoulders. She still makes numerous trips to the mountains, but with friends, she is not anxious to travel to this area of Cade Mountain alone. The weird feeling persists, and the presence is felt even when they are not seen, she says. Helen has also reported sighting the craft from the window of her home in Happy Camp. The beings have visited her at home, and at one time, one of them was standing in her bedroom. She says these beings are very intelligent, they know what you are thinking. When she asked them where they came from, they said there was no use telling her because she would not know anyhow, as she did not understand the universe. Okay, again, these aliens. Are you kidding me right now? You're gonna tell me I don't understand the universe? Okay, thanks, pal. Thanks for that. Her husband Clem shares her views, and he explains, "We are just one little tiny planet. There are millions of planets out there. If this is the only one that has got life on it, then we sure are freaks, ain't we?"
Hmm. I love that, by the way. Yes, that would make us the ultimate of freaks, and that is, as they say, would be the most terrifying thing.
Yes, it really would. That's yeah, that's where the story ends. So thankfully we were able to get the those extra bits because yeah, Paul Cerny did not deliver, and I don't know why Paul Cerny did not deliver on parts 3 and part 4, but there were the first two parts of this story were published in two separate UFO journals, including the MUFON UFO journal, and um, um, I was combing through all of them, and I'm like, "You let me down, Cerny. What the heck, man? What the heck?" But we managed to find it. We tracked down Helen White's story, and like again, like this turns into an abduction story. Like this goes from being there's some stuff up on this mountain to these aliens are getting out and they don't have the greatest intentions with you. And yeah, just the vibe I was getting the entire time was yeah, the fourth kind. And I never want to see that movie again. I've seen it way too many times. I've seen it more times than I cared to. And I reviewed it for we did an episode of the Meltdown on our Strange Skies, and we did we ripped apart the fourth kind, and I didn't want to be reminded of it, but this one reminded me of it, and I figured I'd share it with you all.
Well, it's definitely strange AF. I mean, okay, well, first of all, God damn it, Helen. I mean, just leave it alone. You know, she just had to drag them back out there, and look what happened to her
Mhm.
subsequently. Awful
Yeah,
stories.
yeah,
Did
truly awful.
did she say that all of the beings looked alike during all of these encounters?
I think she alluded to it. She didn't like specifically say it, but I think the idea was that they all looked the same, like they were the same species.
Like, so are they grays, or did she never really go into
She
that
never
view?
really explained
Huh.
it, and the weird thing is like you never get the full picture of what these beings look like. Everything in the newspaper article was pretty kind of vague about everything. And I think maybe it was just the writer of that was just like covering it just to cover it. But yeah, like I imagine if we had gotten the parts 3 and parts 4 of Cerny's articles, we would have gotten more insight on that. And I don't know, I'm gonna make that like a personal project. I want to know where Paul Cerny's work is, if it's still around, if somebody has it. I want to know what the heck else is going on here, because yeah, this case is yeah, it's terrifying. It's just terrifying. It's nightmares. They're nightmares.
I
You're
mean,
welcome for the nightmares.
yeah, this is so much on the no list. There's a lot on the no list, and this would be far more down the hill than lights in the sky, like we were kind of poking fun out in the beginning. It goes so quickly into no, and
Mhm.
the it does make you wonder if any of that stuff is in fact in an attic somewhere, a basement
Right.
somewhere, just in boxes, just sitting there waiting to be discovered by somebody or thrown out, which probably happened, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was talking to Steve Berg a couple weeks ago, and like he's slowly but surely becoming the guy who investigates all of the weirdness that is happening and has happened in Nebraska. And one of the OG investigators of the stuff that happened in that state, he was slowly becoming friends with him. and he had passed away, and he wanted to get his hands on all his research, and before he could, his kids just threw it in the dumpster.
Oh god.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That is
Mhm,
actually really truly heartbreaking considering how difficult it is to get our hands on anything
mhm,
solid. Most of it is just anecdotal, so that is a huge bummer. Last
yeah.
thing about this, have you come across another case where someone is describing their clothes feeling heavy? That kind of stuck out to me.
No, never. Like, it is something that I have never heard in my life. Like, even the choking sensation is something that I've never really heard before unless, like, um, I think kinda like V.S. Boas kind of experienced a little choking sensation when they were piping in the gas into the room that he was in, for a brief second or 2, but, like, this is like, a lot of the elements in this are completely unique, and it sounds almost completely science fiction, but Paul Cerny investigated it himself. Paul Cerny is like he'd written many articles for MUFON, investigated many cases for MUFON, and like pretty serious guy. So I gotta think like, well, he took this one seriously. So like, even though there are these kind of science fiction elements to the story, it's tantalizing enough that you're just like you hope it's not true, but it's like if it
And
is,
what can you do?
I
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, what do you there is no you are not safe from these aliens. There is no protection for you. They're coming.
Well, yeah, and what sucks is they'll get you and then they'll lecture you and you're like, "Dude,
Mhm,
screw you. I don't wanna hear this right now. You've already abducted me, you've stolen me against my
mhm.
will, so F off."
My 2 favorite elements, and these things pop up in cases that I've researched, there are 2 things that always make me laugh, and one of them is when the aliens are kind of the witnesses get their first glimpse of them, and they're standing around and they get the impression that even though they're not talking, they believe they're having like a telepathic conversation with each other, and they look over and they see the humans and they're like, oh god, the humans are here, and then they just get in their ship and leave.
Proper response, no.
Yeah, my other favorite is, in a couple of cases, with, certain experiencers, and I've seen this in, like, there was one case in Brazil, if I recall, from the '60s, and the witness who was taken on board was conversing with this alien, and the the alien was always like, "Oh, humans in their primitive ways." Like, I love it.
"You
Alien
you
just,
cute
like,
little
shit talking.
dummy."
Yeah. Aliens
Yeah,
shit talking humans is the best. It really is when you find it.
yeah. Primitive ways is not exactly a compliment,
Yeah,
in most cases. So it was the old pat on the head there. Here's something from Mark Muncy. We had a similar account from an MIV encounter from Eastern Kentucky from 98, feeling of heavy clothes. So there you
that's
go. Very
interesting.
interesting.
Very interesting, for sure.
Mhm. Thank you, Mark. All right. Well, next up, we have the Rhodesian car escort situation slash abduction case.
This is weird in that, like, you know, it's a I'm just gonna get into it because it's just very weird. So this is May of 1974. A South African couple had an abduction-like experience while traveling from Rhodesia. Of course, Rhodesia now is Zimbabwe. And they were traveling to South Africa to Natal, and the couple, they were given the name Peter and Francis. They were driving through the night, kind of like a Betty and Barney Hill vibe, except there wasn't um, a tropical storm threatening to drop a bunch of water down on New Hampshire. But the night of May 30th, 74, cloudless night, stars are twinkling. It's kind of beautiful out. Um, they they're traveling through the town of Umvuma, and they notice this kind of odd policeman on the roadside, and they call him a policeman, but it's not exactly right. he's wearing some kind of metallic garments, and they kind of had like a plasticky type of look to them. And the Rhodesian police at the time, they actually wore a lot of khaki, so definitely not the Rhodesian police, but they were traveling, um, keeping a relatively good speed, 62 miles an hour. And they passed this strange figure. And when they look back, this figure is gone. They don't know what happened to him. But at 2:30 a.m., there is a light that they see above this hill. And they have this vague impression that it must be a house up on this hill. But Francis found it strange because, like, who's up at 2:30 in the morning? And then they thought maybe it's a communication tower. But as they're going on, this light starts to rotate, and it kind of gives them the lighthouse beacon vibes. Except there's no reason why a lighthouse would need to be there. So like they're just going through these series of explanations in their head. And this is a white light. It's got kind of a bluish tinge to it, and it's like steady for about 5 seconds, turns off for two, so it kind of strobes a little bit. And accompanied by this light, the car's lights start to fade. Rest of the car functions just fine. There's no other problems. There's light jazz from Mozambique playing on the stereo. The car cigarette lighter still works. Everything's going just fine. And this light had come closer to the vehicle. It's kind of pretty much over top of the car itself. And they noticed that it's getting really cold in this car. And like we're talking Africa in May, it's pretty warm in Africa like all the time. So, it shouldn't be cold. So they actually turned the heater on in their car, which was also functioning properly. And then the car started to accelerate on its own. It's going about 93 miles an hour. And Peter actually takes his foot off the accelerator and it starts to go even faster. But he just lights up a cigarette, tries to calm himself down. And this thing, it pushes itself over 100 miles per hour. Brakes are having no effect. The car is just basically out of his control. And they're fully conscious about everything that's going on about them. But like Peter's like surprisingly calm, like so much so that Francis just like looks over and like, how can you be so calm right now? Everything's just so crazy. So this light stays with the couple until they're about half a mile from a place called Fort Victoria. And during this time, the UFOs just kind of going on all sides of the road, moving closer, dropping back. And there are these buses that they keep noticing, and these are like famously, buses that are packed with people and all their possessions, going to and fro everywhere. And what they notice is like uncharacteristically, these buses are empty. And like if you have passengers on this bus, they are not going to leave the bus because they are guarding their possessions at all times. They do not want to be, they fear theft all the time. So they see three buses in total, and there's one that actually Frances sees that actually has the name of a company that she works for on it, which was also just very strange. All these buses are empty, the engines are running, lights are on, but just completely empty. And in some of these places, it was the article told us that it was illegal to park there. So aliens parking buses where they shouldn't be. Um, but yeah, like not far from Fort Victoria, this UFO shoots off. It's 4:30 a.m. and they pull into a gas station and they pull up to the attendant who thinks they're absolutely weird because they're covered in blankets, their heaters on in their car. What the heck? Just what the heck is going on? So, the attendant's wearing shorts, so he's just like looking at them like they're crazy. And they actually stop for about an hour. They start leaving again at 5:30, and pulling away from Fort Victoria, not that far down the road, two bright lights this time appear, and they accompany the car on both sides. So normally these are busy roads around this time, especially now because when this was happening was during a national holiday. We're not exactly sure which one it is because they don't tell us, but it should be heavier traffic. There's literally nobody on the road, and uh, Frances starts to look out the window, and she notices that there's a lot of brush and vegetation under them, and that the car is not making any turns of any kind. Like they're basically the car's traveling over swampland right now. You can see the water below them, and this ride is so smooth that there's only one explanation. These UFOs have lifted up the car and they're just bringing it along, just taking it with them. They don't hear any sounds of any crickets or anything. It's all pretty silent, and they're maintaining a speed of about 75 miles per hour, and they start to pick up a lot of speed. They get up to 124, and eventually, Peter just kind of relaxes in the vehicle. He's like, "Well, I have control of this thing, so just take it easy." So traveling through the early morning hours, and yeah, the car never makes a turn. They make it to the border pretty quick, and um, the UFO kind of starts to maintain its distance. And at around 6:15 a.m., Frances falls asleep, and she Peter tries to wake her a couple times, but she just won't. She won't. She won't get up. And for a while, uh, he kind of just like he goes through what he calls driver's hypnosis. So like you're on the road, you kind of forget everything that's going on because everything kind of just like looks the same. So he's kind of just like in his zone. So it's 7 a.m. Francis wakes again, and there's no sunlight, strangely. And you know, they've made it to the border. Everybody there doesn't see these UFOs. There's no UFO scene. But they talk to border officials. They wonder what the heck is wrong with them because again they're wearing all these warm clothes and everything, and literally asked, "Are you coming from the North Pole?" So, um, and like in the next moment, they finally start to realize, "Oh, it's daylight out now. When did that happen?" That's really weird. So, um, they're at this border patrol stop at 7:30. The next conscious moment is 8:30. So there's an hour discrepancy, and their clocks are even behind by an hour in their vehicle. And the strangest thing, though, is that from where they stopped at Fort Victoria to where they were traveling, which is a place called Bait Bridge, is approximately 178 miles, but the odometer had only registered 10 miles used. So they go to the gas station, fill it up, realize it doesn't take a lot of gas. So what the heck is going on? So they get back to Natal, and they get in contact with a guy named Carl von Vleerden, who was the UFO researcher, member of MUFON in South Africa. And he decides that, hypnosis is the route. So what we find is that Peter was receiving messages through the radio, and these messages were pretty simple. They would tell him, smoke a cigarette, light the lighter, change the station, do all these mundane things. And the voice sounded exactly like a radio broadcaster, but it was like he was just directly talking to him. And he describes how there was music, but yet there wasn't. And the fact that their trip wasn't over the road. These UFOs literally lifted them up and took them the straightest route that they possibly could, which is nice. I mean, if the UFOs could shave off some miles, could shave off some gas, get there quicker, I'm all for it. But yeah, like eventually they learned that Peter was taken on board the UFO. And at one point, there was actually a being transported into the back seat that told him he would be taken on board and shown around. There isn't a lot of detail there, but what we later find is that Peter allegedly he astral traveled. He liked to do it. He contacted alien beings in the past, and he'd had UFO sightings before. So, Pete's an interesting guy. But yeah, these UFOs apparently escorted uh, Peter and Francis for some reason. They abducted him, told him some stuff, brought him back. I think the great thing is like when they finally got back to Natal, they had to surrender their car because they didn't have enough money to pay to have it shipped over.
Are you kidding me? That is the
No.
ultimate slap right there.
Yeah, so like when Von Vleerden shows up and he's investigating this case, he's like, "Let me see the car." He's like, "Oh, we had to surrender it."
Like, about that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
no freaking way.
Yeah.
'Cause, I mean, the car is besides their memories, which they've had to go under hypnosis to find out
Mhm.
more things, which we've heard before. The car was the biggest piece of evidence.
Yeah. Biggest piece of evidence, and I mean, they did get some pictures with it, but they didn't get to do all of the experiments that they wanted to before, it had to
Yeah.
be returned to Rhodesia, so, like, and I get it, you paying those duties, it's expensive, but, yeah, like, this is the one where you have the number one piece of evidence, and you can't really do anything with it.
But they saved the money on the gas because the aliens were floating them all that way. I mean, come on, guys. And also, what in the actual hell was up with those buses? That is creepy.
Right, like, everything about this is, it kinda has that staged aspect, like, even more so
Yeah.
than Betty and Barney Hill, because, like, Betty and Barney Hill are driving through the White Mountains, so, like, there really isn't a lot to see. There isn't any kind of, other motorists out on the road, so, like, yeah, like, you have these abandoned buses sitting on the side of the road, you have one weird looking police dude, you have like a just like a lot of weird elements to this case where like I really wonder if somewhere, the aliens had set up a roadblock and they were just keeping everybody for hours and hours before these people made their way down. It's like, no, we got to do some things with these people. So you're not going to be able to use the road for a little bit. We don't want you catching up. But like, it's just every time that you find these weird aspects to these cases, and like they're very common in like a lot of missing time cases. You will hear people claiming that their memory is that they ran into a road crew that was working on the road late at night for some reason, and they go through hypnosis and they realize, oh, it's not a road crew, it's aliens. And like this has a lot of those hallmarks, except that it had a lot of the hallmarks before these hallmarks started to show up in the 80s. So it's an interesting case for that. It's weird. It's just very weird. Like through and through. Like every element is absurd and strange and it doesn't make sense. Why did the aliens just want to escort a car for hundreds of miles? It's weird. It's just weird.
I'll quote from your obviously favorite movie. It's not an owl. Okay. Um, damn
That damn
aliens
movie.
thinking they can get us. Um, Also, is the thought that one of the buses was actually adorned with the name of her company to maybe keep her a little bit more calm? Not that they were freaking out, but what is that little added weirdness in there as well?
Right, like there's that connection aspect to it all, and what does that exactly mean? Why did they show her something like that? Because the connect it to whatever you're doing, and maybe. But, like, there's also that other aspect where if you really wanted to calm them, these buses would be full of people. So if you're trying to stage
Right.
this, you're trying to make them seem like they're seeing these buses. And again, I don't know why they would want to do that. But
Rob, they can't be bothered that far
mm,
into the effort of things, okay? I mean, we'll put the buses there, we'll put the name of our company on one of them. That's also
just
weird.
one.
But no people. We don't have time for that.
Yeah, like, what do you expect from a bunch of beings that don't understand how bed sheets work? Because there are
Yeah.
some stories, but they don't know how those things work. In some certain, I remember reading one case from John Carpenter, not that John Carpenter, but the
I was like, "Wait, what?"
right, yeah, no, there's an abduction researcher named John Carpenter who was with MUFON for many years, and he talked about he wrote an article about how aliens like fuck up a lot, and in there was one case in which this woman would continually be found on her doorstep knocking on the door at late at night. She's
Mm,
completely naked. These aliens kept stealing her nightgowns. Like, what's the deal with that? Like, why?
assholes.
I know. Total assholes.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, just but give her back her gown at least if you gotta take it off, and put her back in bed. I mean, why would you leave her out on the porch knocking on her own door? That's creepy and really messed up.
It is, and it's like these aliens don't understand what emotional support means. They really don't, because if they
No.
did, they would have better emotional supports in place other than you don't feel emotions right now, or the emotion you feel is calm. Like, I don't like that. Maybe have
Yeah.
something a little more natural in place. Maybe get yourself a psychologist on board that thing and let's talk it out. Don't just,
Therapy dogs. Although maybe their therapy dog is gonna look, something
mm,
straight out of a John Carpenter film, actually,
oh,
that John Carpenter. So
yes,
maybe not the therapy
yes.
dog, but yeah, have somebody on staff to
Mhm.
really talk it through with these folks because and, we're laughing about it because it is funny, but we've both talked to people that it really
Mhm.
does fuck their lives up. Like, they don't sleep, and who could after something
Yeah,
like that? And
yeah.
by God, at least make it to where I can't remember. Don't let me remember
Mhm.
even a part of it because then it opens up the door to all of these other things that could go on.
Yeah.
And I know that hypnosis is a very tongue in cheek thing. It's nefarious to bring up with some people, but I've had a lot of people on there. They're like, "Heck no, I'm not going under hypnosis. I don't want to
Mhm.
know." Or, and heaven forbid any of it's even a skosh true. I get it. I do totally get it. Because
Yeah.
we're not equipped to deal with that kind of stuff. And besides that, it's just really a huge violation.
It is. It really is, and it's just like, why can't somebody teach aliens, like, human sensitivity courses? Like, I think it's an obvious offering that they can bring to the
If we all
table.
have to go through that shit at work, sensitivity training and all that, I
Yeah,
mean, why can't they? I mean, they
exactly.
can build
Like,
these badass ships that can go through whatever they can do, fold time or go through wormholes, whatever the hell they can do. Surely they can sit down for a few hours so that they don't traumatize everyone so badly, you know?
yeah, exactly. Like, aliens don't even know what a hug is. If they knew what a hug is, I think their lives would change if they figured out what a hug was. Go get one. Go hug
But
yourself.
they might then find out what a throat punch is, real
Yeah.
quick. If they come in for the hug and you're like, all right, buddy, listen, it's going to happen here. Speaking of the choking from the first one, that's what's going to go
Mhm.
down right now for you. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know about
it's,
alien hugs, but
you're about to catch these hands. That's just how it's gonna happen.
yeah, hashtag catch these hands. I like it.
Yep.
That was a good one. In a horrible way. That was a good one. Poor
Yeah.
people. Seriously though. All right.
Mhm.
Tap in North Dakota. Yeah, let's go there.
This one's gonna get really weird too. Like, uh, so, this goes back to 2005, and in particular, the property of the Brees family. They lived in Tappan, North Dakota. It's a small place, but they had pretty big farm, about 1,200 acres. They had 100 head of cattle, and it's the family farm, so all your family is involved in some way or another. And most of the sightings revolve around the 15-year-old son named Evan Brees, and his major contribution to the farm is that he and his sister Tia had a corral with 6 hogs in it. And Tappan is there's about 200 people that live there, so it's smaller than Happy Camp. But in October of 2005, Tory Brees, who was Evan's father, found one of his prize cows dead, and nearly about half a mile from where these hog pens would be. And the hog pens are going to play a key part later on in the story. But the body of this cow is just hanging out at the edge of a water pond, and left the carcass out there, assuming that the coyotes would come and take and descend upon it and make quick work of it. But they never did. And this is a direct quote. The quote: "The predators never ate on her. This is something I just don't understand. In fact, I can tell you that up the gully from where that dead cow was in October 2005, I had lost a big sucking calf, about a 900 pounder. I had some feed out there, and one overate and bloated, and the coyotes devoured that thing in about 5 days. It was gone. Just a little bit of hide and a couple of bones. That's it." So that's the contrast. These two critters were that close together. That cow was never bothered, but this other calf was eaten within a matter of a few days. End quote. Um, so
I
things are
like
pretty
the addition
quiet.
of the, accent, by the way. Thank you for that.
It just seemed, only natural with the way
I
that it
do
was
that too.
written. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure that I offend people by it, and I apologize for that, but it just comes out. I can't help it.
it just
Continue, I'm
did.
sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good. But yeah, 6 months later, Evan has an encounter with a strange object at about midnight. It's April 18th, 2006. He heads outside to check on the cattle, and he could kind of hear this odd humming sound permeated through the walls of the house, and the dogs that they had, including one that was named Buster, they start going nuts. So he heads outside with Buster, and they head on up toward the ridge line. And near the makeshift pond is a set of lights that were moving about, and he assumed that they were hunters just poaching on their land. So he decided that he was going to go out there and confront them. But as he got closer, he could see that this was a triangular shaped object, had three pale blue lights on this thing coming from the bottom. It was about 40 feet long, 20 feet wide, and it was kind of hovering about 7 feet above the ground at the time. And the impression that he got from it was that it was looking for something. He wasn't sure what, but it seemed as if this thing was projecting a sweeping beam down to the ground below. So the pair just stood there and watched it until Buster decided to run down after this thing. I don't know what he was going to do, but he was barking like crazy. And the object wanted nothing to do with it, so it just took off, sped away. And Evan runs inside, tells his parents what had happened, and it was later reported that at around the time that this object was leaving, the residents of Tappan reported hearing a loud boom. Evan never said that he heard it, but the other residents said that they did. So the family was just confused. They didn't know what to do, so they reported their sighting to move on. And a guy named Jeff Wachter, who was the state director from North Dakota, he got in touch with the family, came out and investigated. They found 18-inch impressions. They weren't very deep, but they were noticeable. And there was grass in the area that looked like it had been cut, which is weird. But the indentations formed an isosceles triangle that was 34 feet by 34 feet by 25 feet. So, kind of your typical mm, flying triangle kind of sighting here. They determined that since, not all of the grass had been cut, but certain portions of it, that the height of the craft must have been taller than the grass, and that this thing, had legs down on it. So on April 26th, the Minnesota MUFON state director, a guy named Richard Moss, he visits the farm, took soil samples, including control samples. He viewed the dead cow and noticed that there was this odd wedge-shaped carving in it that nobody seemed to have noticed before, but it looked like it had been intentionally made. And they believe that it was recent, like that body had been out there for quite a while, so whatever had made it was relatively recent. Which is even creepier. Um, and there was some black hair within the wounds. Again, very strange. And there were also some kind of surgical cuts above the hooves. Areas of the hide had been removed from around the tail. And again, these are all new developments. This is not something that was reported at the time when they initially saw the cow, out there. So after consulting someone who worked in cattle auctions, they determined that the UFO didn't play a part in the death of the cow. So great to know. Good to know. I don't know how they came to that conclusion, but good on them. So, following the sighting, the family would see strange lights over their farm on a couple of separate occasions. On July 20th at about 11 p.m., Tori was helping a neighbor with his car when they both saw this blue light. It was kind of doing an L-shaped pattern in the sky. And they described it as if it was doing like a grid search looking for something. Um, and every time that Tori would move the car, the blue light would move itself. So it was paying attention to what was going on. And there's this kind of repeat incident that takes place about a month later in August. Another blue light appears above the farmhouse. And I got another direct quote here from Tori. I love his quotes. I got to the crest of the hill and looked southeast, and there and in the gullies, I seen some real bright lights. They weren't a blue light, they weren't a green light, they were just lights and very bright, more like a car headlight. I stopped the bike and sat there and watched. It was totally silent, but there was like tens of lights, not two or three lights. There was a bunch of them. I started the bike and went down so I could move the cattle through the gate. As I got down to the gate on the bike, one of these lights came in our direction. I started getting a little concerned because it started illuminating the pasture to the south of us like almost daylight. It illuminated acres, like 30 or 40 acres. These things would come at us. They were a ways off, about 2 miles away. Then all of a sudden, they would divide into like three lights and go. Well, if you took an intersection sign and drew a straight line down the middle and two branching off of the side, then they would go down into the gullies and you could see one for a while, and then one would come up, and from the other side another would do the same. They did this pattern over and over. End quote. So, we've got lights dividing. They're doing all sorts of weird stuff. But the most dramatic part of this encounter would come on September 11th, 2006. Evan woke up at about midnight. He wanted to get a drink of water, and he's looking out the kitchen window towards the pasture that has the pigs in it, and he sees two figures that enter the pig corral. Um, he's assuming that they were deer looking for pig feed. So he grabbed his 22 and his jacket and he decided he was going to scare him off. Instead, what he found was two figures trying to steal a 400-pound pregnant sow. The figure was able to lift the pig with one arm, transferring it to the second with no problem. In the moonlight, their true form was far from human. A fear grew within Evan as he beheld the sight of two extremely tall figures, somewhere between 7 and 8 feet tall. Evan lifted his rifle, took a shot, hitting the figure holding the pig, which caused it to scream and squeal. The being immediately threw the pig to the second figure in one swift movement, floated over to Evan, picked him up by the shirt, and threw him 20 feet backwards. From the ground, he could hear the loud booms of corrugated metal being ripped from the wall of the corral. Evan ran to a nearby mobile home where his sister was sleeping. He frantically knocked on the door and declared, "They took her! They took her, and I couldn't stop them." Tori would later call the police, and they found nothing because the pig was gone. When investigators arrived at the Brees farm, they found that the being had thrown the pig 12 feet to the other non-wounded figure. Most of the nails that held the metal sheets in place were still attached to the wood frame, with the exception of a few. There were some fresh scratches on the wooden frame, too, though no bullet holes were present. So whatever it was, he hit it. He shot this thing, and um uh there are pictures of Evans. He was wearing this Adidas shirt, and there's 5 large tears in it from being lifted up, and he did apparently have some light scratches in his chest. So we've got some descriptions of these figures. We got some direct quotes here. The hand that lifted him up was human-like, 4 fingers and a thumb, though they had large, intimidating claws at the tip of each finger. They were 7 to 8 feet tall, dark-skinned, narrow, thin, skinny, long, lanky, and strong. They had large, glossy eyes and rounded heads, and something around the temples that resembled bolts, kind of like Frankenstein. Um, no clothing was noticed other than what must have been, dark. Everything was dark, so he couldn't really see anything else. No legs or feet were seen, but he described their movements in terms of floating, levitating, graceful yet mechanical, no wasted movements, and no emotions. So the sow was never found. And for some reason, they felt it was necessary to force a child to undergo hypnosis, which I don't recommend. Don't put teenagers under hypnosis. You don't know what kind of information you're going to get out of there. But according to the hypnosis, there were more than 2 beings. It's just like a lot of additional kind of stuff that doesn't really add anything to the case. But um, except for one thing, that's he apparently was knocked unconscious for a brief period of time before he got back up again. But when he awoke again, the beings and the hogs were gone. But Evan recalled feeling fear after he shot one of the beings, as though through telepathy. And that's that case. It's a yeah. I don't like.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was not expecting a lot of what just happened. That is a special one.
Mhm.
First of all, for Evan to even think to, I don't care what size the gun is, if something is picking up a hoglins of that size,
With
just like
one
it's
arm.
nothing,
Mhm.
I'd just be like, okay, you can have my gun. I'm just gonna go back here, and I go. That was either very ballsy or very stupid, maybe a little both. But what is your thought on what in the actual F those 2 things were? I mean, that's quite a unique description. When you're kinda like, "Well, this is an alien case," and then this
Mhm.
description comes out, and it kind of it kind of a little bit blows things out of the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are cases in which and there are cases that have the hallmarks of more like a haunting than it does, like it's like people are being haunted, but they're being haunted by aliens. So
Mhm.
there's a case from the late 1970s called the South Milton humanoids case, and it is this case involving the Gould family from South Milton, Massachusetts. and they started experiencing they started seeing strange figures on their property, uh large bulky guys wearing hoods. They would see like your
Mm.
classic like gray aliens wearing like glassy helmets. They would see like faces in their windows and stuff. There was at one point they saw this mysterious rock that ended up on their property, except it wasn't a rock because it had windows in it. And this family reports all sorts of other strange things, and it feels like a haunting. The West Wales flap of 1977, and in particular what the Coombs family went through, feels more like a haunting than it does particularly a UFO. Like there are UFOs involved, but for some reason these UFOs keep plaguing this family. Like there are a lot of cases like this, and for some reason the Brees family was of particular interest to this family, and I'm assuming it had to do with their cattle because that's what it seemed to be interested in. Whatever was out there was looking for something. Whether it was looking for a pregnant pig, I don't know, but like they allegedly nabbed one. But again, like sometimes these stories just like again, they don't feel necessarily like a total UFO encounters. They feel like hauntings, and like I really don't know what it was about this family or their property that attracted these UFOs. Like you can kind of go get your cattle wherever you want. I'm assuming a lot of it had to do with the isolation because it's a pretty isolated farm. So that probably has something to do with it. It seems like a lot of the times when you talk about accounts becoming famous, they're from small podunk towns that you've never heard of, and like they're not big cities most of the time. So a lot of these things are attracted to those small spaces. This is one of those small spaces that it just happened to take an interest in, and decided that it wanted a pig for some reason.
Well, Rob, like we hear so many of these encounters and craft to where these things are completely silent, right?
Mhm,
But the thing that woke Evan up was a humming, right? Like
mhm.
that's why he got up.
Yeah.
And again, is this just them screwing up, or maybe they didn't care? Because, well, look at us. We can pick up a 400-pound hog. We're not worried about a human coming out here. But I don't know. All of these different things, they're not all, you would think there would just be the same thing across the board. Everything is silent, or
Mhm,
everything makes a hum, or everything when it takes off, it booms. And that's just not the case. And then you have these beings all looking different in all of these situations. So that
mhm.
doesn't make any sense, right?
Right.
So, I mean, we're not even to the last one yet, but and this is kind of almost like a closing question, but I just want to ask it now. I mean, are you of the mind after looking at all of these things and talking to all these folks yourself, are we in some way, shape, or form dealing with one thing that can manifest in a lot of different ways?
That's a tough one. Because yeah, like when you look at the history of these things, they're all largely varied until you get to a specific point, and that specific point's 1987. That's when things start to become the homogenous group that we have now, which your grays, your mantis beings, your reptilians, your tall blonde aliens, and then there's usually like a fifth alien race that is kind of interchangeable, whether you want to talk about blue avians or whatever one happens to be, popular at the time. But um before then, it doesn't make sense because yeah, again, these beings and their visitations are so varied, so diversified that they don't make sense for an extraterrestrial kind of theory to apply to these most of the time. And what else is like added to these cases is the absurdity in them most of the time, which tends to add a little credence because again, when people bring up alien encounters, they talk about, the White House lawn scenario, or they talk about something that makes a little more logical sense. And these cases don't. There are so many cases throughout the history books that just don't fit into the normal logic that we put alien encounter cases into. So whether this is a singular thing taking on whatever form that it happens to that the witness may find appealing or something like that, it's kind of a possibility. One theory that I've been really dabbling with, especially getting into Ryan Sprague's work, Mike Clelland's work, is that these in many cases these UFO sightings are guideposts for people, and they put them kind of on a path. And I'm a direct cause of that. My UFO sighting in 2015 put me on a path to where I am now. So for some people, I think that's the case, but for others, I don't really know. There are in the case of the Brees family, I don't really know because it doesn't seem like this is a case of a guidepost, a guide of any kind. This is a series of crafts and beings that took an interest in a family, and they are unique. Like this case is reported in the mid 2000s, and in the mid 2000s, that's when you have again this homogenous group of aliens that are reported time and time again. So yeah, it's particularly unique. But I think they stand out um, in the intentionality of these aliens being different from what you get in most encounters. There are absurd elements to this, but they're not as absurd as they are kind of terrifying to witness them. And yeah, at the end of the day, I don't really know what to make of that one because it's just they wanted a pig.
And
It,
they got the pig, which is also strange because the next day the pig is gone. Like, where in the
yes, yeah.
actual hell does a 400 pound hog go? And the other thing is, and it's interesting you saying the parallels between, hauntings and
Mhm,
aliens and demons, and you can even lump Bigfoot in there in some
mhm,
cases. It
yeah,
just depends on where the activity is happening, right? The age, Evan's age. I mean, it usually gets attributed to pubescent girls, but
mhm,
Evan was 15 at the time. So again, that can kind of cross pollinate. Well, oh, well, it was his age, and that was, why he woke up, and why maybe they were maybe not able to, I don't know, they couldn't turn him off. Why did he hear the humming and nobody else heard the humming and he got up and
mhm.
had to deal with this shit? So that's interesting. The cross pollination, or possible, I should say, cross pollination between other subjects instead of having these things so parceled out separately.
Yeah, and you kinda have to wonder, as Evan is now he's, like, what, like, 30? Close to it? You gotta wonder what he's doing now, and, how his life has changed after that. Because like, that's
Yeah.
some life state changing stuff. Because it does seem like whatever was there chose him to appear. I mean, not the only one, like, Tori did see some lights and stuff like that, but, like, in particular, when it comes to, these close encounters, like, the closest encounters, it was Evan that these beings appeared to, and that these, UFOs appeared to. So yeah, what was it about this kid that, like, for some reason was perceptive to all of this? That's, like, the $1,000,000 question. And I mean, like, there's always going to be those cross sections across all of this phenomenon. Like, for instance, in the Bigfoot world, there's the case of Doc Priestley traveling in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia in 1960. He's traveling behind a bus in his car that has some friends on it, and at a certain point, his car dies on him, and he looks over to the left hand side of the road, and he sees a Bigfoot there. Very weird. So the Bigfoot runs off. Car starts up again, continues down the road, and a little further down, finally catches up with the bus. The car dies again, and he looks over, and there's that Bigfoot there. And what's interesting about this Bigfoot is he's holding up the hair on his stomach. He puts it down, and the vehicle starts up again. How does that make sense? Like, what
Those
would it
some
how
powerful abs right there.
I know, the most powerful, like, no, let's be honest, this is the most powerful dad bod you've ever seen out in them woods. Just the ability that's got that being that particular Bigfoot has to be a mechanic somewhere in that Bigfoot world. Like, he's got too much skill for it.
Yeah, that's, and yeah, those are the kind of stories that, most in the Bigfoot world are going la 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 la. But if you go off the stories like we're talking about tonight about strange ones and um, uh, it's not an owl. We can bring that up again, right? Like
Mhm.
screen memories, and it's not an owl. And I mean,
Yeah.
I've heard a story on my own show where there was four people in a car, and three of them saw a big ass owl, and the last person saw it for what it was, an
Mhm.
alien. The 4 foot tall gray. Uh,
Yeah.
Another fuck up on their part. Can't you all just get it right? Like have them all see an owl or
Seriously.
whatever you need to do to not screw these people up. But yeah. Anyway, that one also extremely odd, and then the description of those things is, slightly again, just, very unique.
Mhm.
Still got that
Yeah.
shirt though. He's got the picture of the shirt you said. I'll have to, dig
Yeah.
that up.
Yeah, like, the print scans that I got of the MUFON journal, they're not the greatest, photos, but you can see the rips in it,
I
for
mean, that's
sure.
recent, really, considering the kinds of cases that we cover, right? 2005,
Yeah.
that's pretty damn
Oh,
recent.
Linda Moulton Howe has pictures on her website, and they're all in color pictures, so, yeah, there's a ton of them up there.
Earth Files, I think, is her website, huh? I'll have to go
Yep,
there and check that out.
yep.
Earth Files. Cool beans. All right, last but not least, Connorsville, Indiana. I
Yeah,
don't want to say the name of the thing because I want it to be a surprise. So I'm just going to say the place.
yeah, so, Uh, one thing that my nerd ass does is I like to dive into old UFO journals, and one of the greatest resources for that is the Archives for the Unexplained. It's website's afu.se. It's a Swedish website, but they have like an unbelievable um, amount of old UFO journals scanned in PDFs on their website. And one of them that I found was Canadian UFO Report. And um, Canadian UFO Report is great because it feels like it's more veered toward the witness than getting the straight facts. So if you read through certain journals like Flying Saucer Review is worried about the facts. They want to get the facts of the case. They'll get a little bit of blurb about the witness. That's it. With Canadian UFO Report, it's down home, it's rustic. It feels very Canadian in the way that they approach their cases and talking to individual witnesses. And I always love the way that they write about things because they write about them while they're in the investigation rather than making it seem like they're writing something after the fact. But this case is weird. It's from Connorsville, Indiana, August of 1966. It's around 11 p.m. And there's three children: Bobby Johnson, who's 11, Tina Johnson, 10, and Gail Johnson, who is 8. And actually, Bobby, they called him Bobby Dale. They were playing in their yard, and it was young Gail that sees this strange light in the sky, and she says, quote, "It looked like a great big star, and I knew it wasn't a star because it was too big. It started getting bigger. I turned around to tell Tina and Bobby Dale, and it had moved over there closer. It had all these colors, like red and blue spots and some others. It tilted toward the ground, and I thought I heard a buzzing sound. I didn't look at it very long. I ran in the house, told my daddy, then watched out the window." So Tina and Bobby Dale were out there for most of this sighting. Their dogs were out there, and it was they they look up, they see this object, and at first Tina starts to say "Starlight, Star Bright" because she assumes it's like a meteor or something, and she notices it starts to move, and this thing comes very close to where they are, like right at the edge of their house, and it's hanging maybe, I don't know, 50 feet in the air or something like that. But they're looking up at this thing, and it's they describe it being larger than their barn. This thing was really big, like these are these are kids, so you're not going to get exact measurements to how big this thing was, but like a kid can compare it to something, and when something's as big as your barn, it's a pretty damn big object. So it's hanging over the treetops, and it's kind of tilting in Tina's direction. And Bobby Dale recounts that he was under the trees, kind of messing with the dogs, and he looks up, and he sees the object too. And again, he describes it as big as the barn itself too. It didn't make any noise, um, but the dogs were just like barking and going crazy. Quote, then a kind of plate opened up, big, wide. It looked like a porthole, and there were two metal pieces and there was a little one in the middle, and it just slid open. Then a big beam shot down, kind of whitish orange. It went down north of town real fast and came back up. I saw it go down over the hill, and I heard the dogs barking and turned to see what they were doing. And when I saw it coming back up, it was there about 30 seconds. Then it came back up and had an object in it. So from where they lived, you could see like the nearest city lights in the distance. And he he described how this object, it reminded him of a helicopter that had hooked onto a station wagon or something and was trying to lift it up. So what he notices is in the beam, there is what looks like a miniature car in this beam going towards this object. Like it's kind of like bringing it in. Um, uh, he says, quote, it looked like some kind of car or something. It went right over my head, almost above the trees, and it looked pretty good sized. Then it got smaller. When it got nearer the spaceship, it looked like a little car. So Tina corroborates all this. Uh, it's uh, it's moving. She says it's moving slowly through the air, and she says it looks like a little car. And then whatever this thing is enters the ship. The doors on it shut, and she just describes being half scared to death. But for her, she claims that she saw a pair of beings looking down at her while they were doing this. Everybody calls her a liar, including her father, everybody else out there. But she has kind of a unique description of these beings. Again, this is 1966. Um, but she goes on after her father calls her a liar. She says, I am not dad. Honestly, it was dark and I couldn't describe it really, but it was just like it had a nose and everything. I could see enough that it looked like a human being, only it was scaly, like skin scaling off, scaly and dark. That's the honest truth. I'm not lying. I'm not lying. There was something on its face I can't describe. I haven't seen anything like it in the whole world. I looked at his head and I could see the eyes just a real little bit. They were red, real little, and they were bright red. Only one arm was a little longer than the other. It looked like to me, because they were holding their arms like, yes, there were two of them in there. They looked like their arms were a little shorter, about like that. Um, and she gestured to kind of, get across what she meant. And in a later interview, a guy named Worley asked her how she could see that one arm was shorter than the other, and she replied that the occupants held out their arms for some reason, and she noticed the different lengths in their arms. And she said that they also push buttons just like us. So, as the object departed, both Bobby Dale and Tina kind of remembered aspects a little differently. It kind of wobbled a little bit. Uh, like, he described it like a cat falling out of a tree, and he also had climbed a tree, fell out of it while he was watching this thing. He remembers it because he had a sore hip, but uh the cat that they had also kind of suffered from something. It ended up having like a stroke or something like that, and yeah, that's the sad portion of it. But yeah, they kind of just watch this object disappear after a period of time, takes off. But yeah, it's one of those weird ones. And like at this time, there are a couple cases that kind of stick out when it comes to like kind of the scaly aspect of these particular beings. And one of them is the Ryrie, Idaho carjacking case, which occurred about over a year after this in Idaho. These two guys, Guy Tossi and Will Begay, they were driving just outside of Ryrie when came around a bend, and they saw this kind of 25-foot diameter UFO sitting in the middle of the road. It's got a ring of lights around it, transparent dome on top, and they could see two beings inside this thing, and they described their skin kind of roughly scaly, but also kind of resembling like the Pascagoula aliens, and like, it um kind of having like a lot of folds in it and such. They were Balians. They had big ass ears, and the dome opens up. One of the beings floats out of this thing, floats over to their vehicle, gets in the driver's side, pushes the other two over, takes this thing into a field that goes on a little joyride until it just like stops in the middle of the field. One of these guys gets out and decides to run to the nearest farmhouse to get help. The other guy's sitting in the cab, terrified, pushed over as far as he can away from this being, and this being is looking over at him, trying to talk to him. Can't understand a word he's saying. And eventually, realizing that he's not getting through to him, exits the vehicle, floats back to his UFO, and it takes off. And the kicker about this case is that 2 hours later, a little further down the road, there was a guy, he had been drinking a little bit, reported that a UFO stopped him and that an alien got out and tried to get into his truck. So you kind of have that case going on. It also seems kind of reminiscent of Herbert Shermer's alien abductors, who his case was a month after the Ryrie, Idaho guys. Um, Herbert Shermer, police officer, he was out on patrol December 2nd, 1967. He sees a light that he assumes is like a vehicle that's having trouble, goes to investigate, realizes that it's a UFO. He observes it for what he thinks is a few seconds, and then the object flies off. Later, he finds that he's missing time, undergoes hypnosis through Dr. Leo Sprinkle, and this was through the Condon Committee, the Colorado Project. They actually had him come out to Boulder, Colorado, where they put him under, and he came forward with an abduction story. And the beings that he met were kind of human looking, except for their eyes, which kind of had a reptilian kind of, they look like a reptile's eyes in many ways. But interacted with those beings. Uh, and then also apparently while he was in Boulder, Colorado, some people blew up his car. Don't know if that's totally true, but that's a story that exists, and is out there. I talked to Steve Berg about it because like that's the biggest case from Nebraska. And according to Herbert Shermer's brothers, they didn't blow up his car. But one thing that the people of Ashland, Nebraska did do after he came forward with his story is that they made a mock dummy of him and they hung it in the local cemetery. But he claims that he got a kick out of it. He thought it was funny. So, that is what it is. But like,
Hmm.
it's interesting that you have some parallels to some other cases that are happening kind of around the same time with like beings that have kind of similar features.
I just hate when the Nebraska mob blows up my car. It's
I
very
know.
annoying, you know?
It is. It is. Like, I don't know
It's
how
all
many
about that
payments he had left. Yeah.
like insurance money. No. It's all
Yeah,
about
right.
that metal plate placement as we learned in casino.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the well, you probably don't know because you would have said, but the thing that stuck out about her description was the I mean, it was all very strange, but she said there was something on the face that I had never seen before. I wonder what the hell that was. What does she
Right.
mean by
Like,
that?
exactly. Like, young girl can't fully put into description what she saw, but like I've been thinking the same thing. Like, what exactly are you talking about? Like, what is this thing on the face? Is it and like if I recall correctly, the beings in the Ryrie, Idaho case did have something that looked like it was going to their nose, like maybe some kind of breathing apparatus or something like that.
Mm,
I can't remember, but I tend to wonder if that's maybe what she saw. I don't really know, but it's yeah, it's one of those weird aspects to all of this is like um we have children that have this description and it's just like I wish there was more detail here.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I mean, it could be anything. You're like, is there tentacles coming out of his cheek? Is there extra scales or different color scales or
Yeah.
no scales? And actually got I don't know. Your brain could just fill in the blanks there, which is not what we're here to do, but you can't really help it. Well,
Yeah.
does anybody in the My Lovely Peanut Gallery have any questions or comments or anything? You can raise your hand and I will see you. And if not, then we can let Rob off the hook. But no, thank you so much, Rob, for these because the parallels again, not to be parroting the same thing, but even as strange as some of these get, you're kind of going, you know what? This reminds me of this or that reminds me of that. And you do the same thing, I'm sure. When you
Mhm.
hear people talk, you're like, holy shit, like that sounds exactly and it's not always another UFO case. It could be, as you say, a haunting or a Bigfoot encounter. I'm sure
Yep.
Stan Gordon half the time will do that, right? Still to this day, he's probably going, well, I mean, my God, I wrote about this in my book, and I
Yeah.
know that there are parallels to these supposedly different subjects. But Rob, before you go, please let everybody know where to find you and all of these millions of different projects that you're working on, by the way.
Oh my god, yeah, there's so many of them right now. The Our Strange Skies podcast, you can find it wherever you find your podcasts. If you want to follow along on social media, it's Our Strange Skies at Twitter, Instagram. That's where you can find me most of the time. I do have a webcomic where I write. My buddy Todd Purse illustrates a lot of infamous UFO sightings from like time immemorial. Uh we've got our ninth one coming out this month. We put out one a month, but if you want to check that out, it's on Twitter at Welcome UFO Peeps and Instagram at Welcome UFO People. I have an alien themed kind of Dungeons and Dragons game coming out soon. So if you want to keep updated with that, you can follow on Twitter and Instagram at Sunderland RPG, and it's going to be a fun one. But yeah, that's pretty much all the projects I got going on. And then yeah, I'm in the process of writing a book that will hopefully be out within like a year and a half. So yeah, just a lot of stuff going on.
Volume one, and there will be at least two of those. So you guys will
Yeah.
hear Rob back on probably ITF Maine to be promoting that. Hey, Rob, who, because I've seen the Welcome UFO Peeps stuff online, who does
Mhm.
the illustration for that?
Todd Purse, he's a good dude.
So
He's my
good.
good buddy. Yeah, he's if you want to follow his stuff, he's on Instagram. That's the only place you can find him. At TODDDE85. He puts out art daily. He does a lot of different things. His website is createmagicstudios.com, and you can find all sorts of fantastic, weird art. Like he does like paranormal stuff like every day, and he has a really wonderful take on everything. And if you enjoy the art style, yeah, definitely go give him a follow because I love his stuff. He's got a lot of great stuff on his Instagram.
Yeah, he's got a great style. Has he had experiences? Is that why he's so into that aspect for, creating art?
No, it's not even that. It's just he's so interested in the topic that he dives into everything. And like
That's cool.
he has a podcast through Create Magic Studios. And every Saturday he will have certain people on his podcast. He will interview them, and you kind of get the idea of what he's really attracted to when it comes to this phenomenon, what he really looks into. And it's a delight to hear him talk because like he's got like a childlike sense of wonder about him, which is what is great about the art that he does. He comes at it through a more positive light than a negative one, which he doesn't necessarily do that to diminish the kind of trauma that these encounters can cause, but like he just comes at it from a different perspective, like a more positive perspective. And you can see that in his art. But like yeah, he has his own podcast and everything. So yeah, go check him out, createmagicstudios.com.
It's all positive until your butt hurts, and then you're like, "Hey, what went on? Okay, I need to
Mm,
know, you little dudes in my house," which is
yeah,
very not cool.
exactly.
Well, thanks again, Rob, and as Arnold says, you will be back for sure. So,
Yes, absolutely, thank you for having me on.
luck compiling that book, man. I know how it goes.
Oh yeah, I appreciate that. It's gonna be an arduous task, but we're gonna get it done. We're gonna do
Worth
it.
it. Totally worth it. All right. Well,
Absolutely.
everybody in chat and watching, thank you for being here. Rob, million thanks again, man. We'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.